This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Life on the Mississippi by Mark Twain. Chapter 47, Uncle Remus and Mr. Cable. Mr. Joel Chandler Harris, Uncle Remus, was to arrive from Atlanta at 7 o'clock Sunday morning, so we got up and received him. We were able to detect him among the crowd of arrivals at the hotel counter by his correspondence with a description of him which had been furnished us from a trustworthy source. He was said to be undersized, red-haired, and somewhat freckled. He was the only man in the party whose outside tallied with this bill of particulars. He was said to be very shy. He is a shy man. Of this there is no doubt. It may not show on the surface, but the shyness is there. After days of intimacy, one wonders to see that it is still in about as strong force as ever. There is a fine and beautiful nature hidden behind it, as all know who have read the Uncle Remus book, and a fine genius, too, as all know by the same sign. I seem to be talking quite freely about this neighbor, but in talking to the public, I am but talking to his personal friends, and these things are permissible among friends. He deeply disappointed a number of children who had flocked eagerly to see Mr. Cable's house to get a glimpse of the illustrious sage and oracle of the nation's nurseries. They said, "Why, he's white!" They were grieved about it. So, to console them, the book was brought, that they might hear Uncle Remus's tar-baby story from the lips of Uncle Remus himself, or what in their outraged eyes was left of him. But it turned out that he had never read aloud to people, and was too shy to venture the attempt now. Mr. Cable and I read from books of ours to show him what an easy trick it was. But his immortal shyness was proof against even this sagacious strategy, so we had to read about Brer Rabbit ourselves. Mr. Harris ought to be able to read the Negro dialect better than anybody else, for in the matter of writing it, he is the only master the country has produced. Mr. Cable is the only master in the writing of French dialects that the country has produced, and he reads them in perfection. It was a great treat to hear him read about Jean Poquelin and about Inerarity and his famous pig-shoe, representing Louisiana refusing to hunter the Union, along with passages of nicely shaded German dialect from a novel which was still in manuscript. It came out in conversation that in two different instances Mr. Cable got into grotesque trouble by using, in his books, next to impossible French names, which nevertheless happened to be borne by living and sensitive citizens of New Orleans. His names were either inventions or were borrowed from the ancient and obsolete past. I do not now remember which, but at any rate living bearers of them turned up, and were a good deal hurt at having attention directed to themselves and their affairs in so excessively public a manner. Mr. Warner and I had an experience of the same sort when we wrote the book called The Gilded Age. There is a character in it called Sellers. I do not remember what his first name was in the beginning, but anyway, Mr. Warner did not like it, and wanted it improved. He asked me if I was able to imagine a person named Eschol Sellers. Of course I said I could not, without stimulants. He said that away out west once he had met and contemplated and actually shaken hands with a man bearing that impossible name, Eschol Sellers. He added, "It was 20 years ago. His name has probably carried him off before this, and if it hasn't, he will never see the book anyhow. We will confiscate his name. The name you are using is common and therefore dangerous. There are probably 1,000 Sellers bearing it, and the whole horde will come after us. But Eschol Sellers is a safe name. It is a rock." So we borrowed that name, and when the book had been out about a week, one of the stateliest and handsomest and most aristocratic-looking white men that ever lived called around, with the most formidable libel suit in his pocket that ever, well, in brief, we got his permission to suppress an edition of 10 million. Footnote, figures taken from memory and probably incorrect. I think it was more. 10 million copies of the book, and change that name to Mulberry Sellers in future editions. End of chapter 47.